You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
3, 2, 1.
We are gathered here as advisors, as scientists.
The kind of place we expect a ghost to like to wander around.
Hey, we all know that we're gonna die, baby.
I'll help you. I'm something of a witch.
Welcome to Mission Spooky. With us today is Tyler Strand of Hellier Season 2 fame. First of all, thank you for joining us, Tyler. And how are you doing today?
I am happy to be here, and thank you for having me. I think we're in for a real bizarre treat today.
Yeah, I have my boxing gloves right there. I'm going to lose, but I'll go down fighting.
What's interesting about you two is I don't normally go out of my way. I've never gone out of my way to contact someone or to leave a message, let alone on what I would view as a more critical assessment of Hellier. But I appreciated it because I think everybody should be critical and skeptical of things, especially in the modern age when you're being shown pop culture versions of paranormal investigation on popular TV. I think by default, if you're someone who's genuinely curious about this phenomena, it's blatantly apparent that what you're being shown on television is not real, and it's very hyperbolic, and it's ridiculous in most cases. So it was interesting hearing a take from you two where you were supportive of it. You seemed to enjoy it, but you had criticisms that I thought were valid. I appreciated your assessment, but I also knew that you could be satisfied by knowing that there was an off-screen answer, which pretty much every criticism you had, in my mind, does have an off-screen answer. And I thought maybe one of the things, before we may be able to deviate, if you want to touch base on some of those things, I'm more than willing to answer any Hellier questions and criticisms.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah, let's start with that. Kiki, fire away.
Before I get into it, we're going to break early for a very special promo for Hunted Encore and our podcast promo this week, Reverie True Crime. We'll be right back with Tyler Strand and his rebuttal to our review of Hellier Season 2. All right, JC, commercial for Hunted Encore. Take one and go.
For thousands of years, they existed among us, a secret nation with lust for power.
No, that's the beginning of Blade. Focus up, JC.
Michael and Sam have just moved to Santa Clara, California.
Wrong. That's Lost Boys. Try it again.
He chose one man. He gave him infinite power.
God, no, that's Interview with the Vampire. Did you even read the script?
They are immortal damned, one family lusting for power and wealth.
That's Underworld.
In a world.
Absolutely not. No.
From Charging Moose Media.
Finally.
Say hello
comes
to your worst nightmare.
The Hunted Encore.
No, well, hey, you'll get there.
A musical action comedy that follows a troupe of crooning New York City vampire slayers as they take on a mob of ruthless bloodsuckers.
We'll show them who runs this town. Come on, ride.
Make your way to Bandcamp now and enter code SPOOKY through the month of October to get 20% off The Hunted Encore Season 1 and 2. Don't forget to watch this hilariously macabre masterpiece on Fantasy Network. We guarantee it won't suck.
My name is Paige, and I'm the host of Reverie True Crime. Reverie means to daydream, but even daydreams can turn into nightmares. Join me as I tell you about horrific reveries on the Reverie True Crime Podcast, wherever you stream your favorite podcasts.
If you haven't seen Hellier yet, it is on Amazon Prime and at hellier.tv. It is a documentary series that explores the progression of synchronicities and high strangeness in Hellier, Kentucky. It also stars Greg and Dana Newkirk, Connor Randall, and Carl What in God's name is that last name?
His last name is Pfeiffer. Carl
Pfeiffer? Carl
Yeah.
Pfeiffer.
Oh my gosh.
I hate silent letters.
There have been interviews, there have been podcasts and things where people have called him Pfiffer.
Nice.
Sorry, Carl. You got
I know, right?
got a confusing last name for some people, I guess.
Carl, whenever he's on, I'm like, I'm so glued to the TV. What are you saying, Carl? Give me the info. He just does so much research.
You know what? It's funny you say that. I could see how you would have that gravitation because Carl tends to be a more analytical brain, at least when he's conveying ideas. He does an excellent job at getting from point A to point B, but that's not something that's easily done with concepts, really complicated concepts that you get in Hellier, and there's still a lot more, to be dug up. Hellier really is just the tip of the iceberg, but it's one of those things. One of the difficulties of the project is that people really have to start doing their own work outside of it, to dig deeper and to get all the nuances and to get all the finer details. I always tell people that Hellier is a lot like the movie adaptation of a book. And you commonly hear people say, well, the book was better than the movie. And Hellier as a documentary is more so the movie adaptation of the countless hours of research and the countless hours of conversation and book reading and discussions and all those strange things, condensed. It's not an easy thing to do. Now, that said, I'm not saying that as a slight. I think Carl is amazing and he did an excellent job. I'm just saying that there's so much info, there's so much detail in this kind of stuff that unless people start digging into it on their own, they're not going to be able to understand why we are the way we are. not all the way. It takes a conscious effort.
Yes, it's kind of like taking one of those huge Potter books and then slapping that up on the movie screen. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be left out.
Yeah, of course.
Just because you have to keep it moving and at least keep it interesting because you're watching something as opposed to reading it. So
of course, and that's by default, and that's for the sake of creating something that actually has at least some entertainment value that's consumable. Like a lot of people don't understand, especially when it comes to criticisms, is that at the end of the day, Hellier is a documentary. We're not giving you archived footage and archived details and research. Like, we're making a documentary that's watchable for people across the US on Amazon Prime or YouTube. It has to have entertainment value. So, a part of that, if you don't mind me jumping into one of the topics that you mentioned on your earlier episode was the
Oh, go right ahead.
Go right ahead.
The criticisms of not being able to hear what's coming from the other end of the spirit box or the Frank's box, which is a valid criticism because it's like, I don't like that we don't get to hear what's coming from the other end. But that's kind of not the point when we're trying to polish something up for a doc. And there's a lot of different avenues of thought that go with that. So I understand that people wouldn't trust something like the Estes method, let alone spirit boxes on their own, which I myself do not trust. I don't believe that they are a good tool to use on their own as they were originally intended. I think that the Estes method is the answer to using it better because it creates a double-blind test. That being said, I know that you guys, you mentioned frustrations. It's like, damn, I wish I could hear what was from the other end. How do we know what they're hearing? And here's what's interesting about that. And here's why it's a damned if you do and a damned if you don't kind of thing. Is unless you do extensive research into the Estes method, there's a really good article written on Planet Weird if people want to read about the Estes method. But where it was developed, it was created by Connor Randall and Carl Pfeiffer. And you can actually see that development occur in a web series called Spirits of the Stanley that they created.
Yes.
That's kind of their foot in the door of creating, an episodic series or show. And it's super invaluable, I think, having two people on the team that have actually been given this amazing opportunity to have such extensive research done over the course of years at this one location. And in that time, they've been able to hone their skills. So if you watch Spirits of the Stanley, you will see how the Estes method got developed. But what I think a lot of people don't know about it, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, and I bring up Connor and Carl because they, for all intents and purposes, are the experts, and if there's any questions on it, they should be the ones asked about it. But being someone who's been around them as friends of theirs, who have heard their various experiments with it, one of the most interesting things they've found with the method is that they've discovered it works even if you're not in the same room. You can have someone plugged into the spirit box, and you could have someone on the other side of a building asking questions with the intent of asking them. And they will receive and give responses in pertinence to the question you've asked. Now it gets even stranger than that. If I am not misunderstanding what I've heard Connor and Carl say before, they have done experiments. They've done almost every variation of the Estes method you could think, like multiple people plugged into one machine, people from a distance, as well as having audio play out loud while they were asking questions. And what's so bizarre is there are occurrences where someone will give responses when nothing comes out of the box externally. And that's fascinating for a lot of reasons. And an aspect of this is the fact that I know Greg, Dana and I are very similar on our mindset of this. I'm not sure where Carl and Connor fall on this at the moment, just because I can't remember. So sorry, guys, if you're hearing this. But Greg, Dana, and I tend to believe that there's a huge aspect of the Estes method that works, not because you're listening to a broken radio. It's working because you're giving a viable resource for something to tap into your own mind and give you what you need as a lubricant to help communication through psi phenomena. That's what I think is at work, and I think that's why the Estes method works so well when it's not being used as a single spirit box. I don't trust spirit boxes as a viable tool because, like pareidolia, I know you mentioned in your episode, it's like, oh, everybody has something on their own mind. And, they have biases, so they kind of expect responses, and that tailors the responses they're receiving. You see that genuinely happen when people are listening to a spirit box out loud, because people may have preconcepts of what they think they want to hear. On top of that, even if something does come through and it's a little mumbled or distorted, all it takes is one person to say, wait, I think I heard this, and then everybody hears that, because now you can't unhear it. The Estes method as a double-blind test, as this person doesn't hear what is being said, as well as we don't hear what's being received, eliminates that problem. Now, I understand that there's a frustration where it's like, oh, well, we can't hear what's going on. Maybe they're faking it. But again, it doesn't matter if we show that anyway, because the odds are there are elements of this that come through that don't even come from the box, even though it seems that way when you're in the moment doing the experiment. There's something stranger at work, and there's allusions to this in other folklore, or I should say paranormal history. The way the Men in Black were originally contacted, interestingly enough, almost parallels the Estes method, where Albert Bender, when he was doing these rituals, he was a ritual magician. When he contacted these entities that would come to be known as the Men in Black, they told him to tune a radio station in between the channels, and they could communicate that way. It all comes back to that aspect of liminality. It's interesting how liminality plays such a vital role in so many aspects of this phenomena, right down to physical ones. Even the liminality of a radio station being the channel in which maybe you can communicate. So that's why when it comes to making a documentary, doing something that at least has entertainment value, you're already losing at least some kind of strange, I don't want to say shock value, to the fact that you can see it at work when it sounds like you're hearing two people talk to something that's not a person. You ruin that by just having that blast out to begin with. I understand it's frustrating and it takes a certain amount of faith, but you also need to understand that, one, with the studies that have been conducted, which I understand the public wouldn't know if they're not as invested in the development of the Estes method. I get it. But all of those things lined up with the theories of how it works shows that, one, it wouldn't matter if we showed it anyway, because at the very best, even if we had an external input, what are we going to get from skeptical minds anyway? Oh, well, I didn't hear that. So like it doesn't matter. So are we going to portray the Estes method working in a way that is striking, where it's like, wow, it's real odd that it sounds like this person's talking to something that's not them? Or are we just going to ruin the moment by going, well, let's just give the public everything and give every audio file and everything? Like at that point, it's not a documentary anymore. You're not viewing something. You're not viewing a product. You're just listening to archival information, and like it defeats the purpose of how the Estes method works, in my opinion, with what has been shown thus far. So I hope that in some way answers that question. And the thing is, when it comes to the pareidolia of sound, I have seen enough with the Estes method to know there is something stranger at work, because I have seen so many people give answers to things they themselves on a personal level do not know. One of those things, interestingly enough, was captured in Hellier, and it never even made it into Hellier, because at the time that it was captured, nobody understood the reference. And I talk about this all the time. The crew laughs at me because I beat this dead horse all the time, but I think it's very important to note. And I wouldn't be surprised if you do see this maybe in a future season, if we get filming underway. But in season 1, now, when Connor was on the porch giving the first Estes method session in season 1, one of the things Connor said on that porch, and Connor and Carl having a heavy ghost background, and even with the illusions we found in the case, wasn't really relevant, and it wasn't really noted as significant at that time. He said on that porch, you can enter Venus through the caves. Connor had no idea what that meant. Connor had no background in the illusions, the Venus that keep popping up, all this strangeness that you find in ufology, because at that time, either one wasn't relevant or we weren't as, I don't know, we just didn't have that information on hand. And the only reason I know that was said is when we were filming season 2, before we went to go meet Tanya Derenberger to interview her, we went through the transcripts. Like, Connor is such a good analytical person of cataloging data. Usually when they do a strange session, a good Estes method session, Connor will go back and he'll actually make a whole typed out transcript of the session for records. And before we went to go meet Tanya, all of us collectively, while we were at the Newkirks, read through the transcript of that session just to re-jog our memory, because a lot of that stuff seemed to pertain to things like Carl Ardo and Connor Cold, the stuff that was in relation to Indrid. So we, doing our diligent research, read through the transcript while we were there. And it was reading through this unedited transcript that I was reading all this stuff of Connor talking about going into the cave systems and how the caves, there's a door and how you can enter Venus through the caves. That is a direct reflection of these illusions I end up bringing up in season 2 with the work at Adorpa, which is Aphrodite spelled backwards, about this strange story from Kentucky in the 1800s where a man goes into the cave systems, seemingly following what sounds like an extraterrestrial or a goblin, if you want to call it that, into the what's called the unknown country. So there's always these strange kind of allusions to Venus. You see people mention this in UFO lore, when they're contactees meeting beings that step out of ships that say they're from the planet Venus, But I think all of that stuff isn't necessarily physical, rather than an occult illusion to what that may mean. But anyway, getting back on track to the question, that's why you don't get to hear what's coming out of the spirit box, because at the end of the day, if someone's going to be militantly skeptical, it's not going to matter anyway. But I've seen enough of it work, and the concepts behind it. Again, there's something you're damned if you do, damned if you don't anyway. I've seen it work. If people are going to trust the work we're doing at hand to begin with, you already have to have a certain level of faith in us anyway. It's like, if we're not people who fake things, we're not people who, like, we all collectively understand if there's even one thing like that, everything else doesn't matter and it's destroyed. Like, basically our lives are dependent on not being that. The Estes method is portrayed the way that's portrayed because that's the best way to portray it, to show people in the most striking manner what it does for the sake of a documentary, which is a consumable product.
I mean, that's a very good answer to that.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. But this is why I reached out, because like I don't mind people having criticisms.
So for the record, I think it was only JC that complained about that, right?
I mean, that sounds fair. That sounds very fair. I would complain about that. And I still kind of stand by my complaint, but I'm much more educated in the reason.
I mean,
why.
no, it's fine.
I would
but this
still
is...
like personally that information. I trust you guys, but I try to be incredibly skeptical of everything
Sure.
I don't personally perceive. So,
well, sure. And the only thing I could say to that to quench your thirst is do it yourself.
oh, you got me.
It's the only thing. It's the only thing anyone can do with any of this to give them that satisfaction. And I can stand behind it because I know that when people do it, it works. So like, it doesn't, at the end of the day, people need to go out there and do it themselves. And they'll see it at work. People all around the country use the Estes method now, because it's such a popular way of spirit communication. I think it's great. I always call it like it's a seance in your pocket. As a documentary, you have to at least appreciate the fact that it has to be done in a way where it's at least watchable. If you're having everything like that, it's not even fun at that point. You still have to have fun with it. And I think that's, when it comes to harsh criticisms, that's something that's overlooked, is like, you got to have fun with it. There are certain edits and things where it's like, you have to understand that people still have to view a product. And that's very much what Hellier is. Not to say that it's not real. Everything in it is real. But it's still being polished in a way where it flows like a documentary in a documentary style. It loses that style if you just have every little nuanced thing like that. It ruins the impact of certain things. And you don't want to do that because that's bad filmmaking.
Yeah.
You can't say Hellier is shot beautifully in its cinematography and then discredit aspects of it that make it beautiful. One of the things that makes it beautiful are making moments impactful. That's Carl's job. You lose impact by giving archival information, which would just be recordings of every single thing coming out of a broken static box. You have to appreciate the art form that is the documentary as well, if you're going to accept it in and of itself.
That's very fair.
After listening to Paranormal Resident, he does a great show. He's in Ireland and he does a spirit box and he goes to these different locations. Now he does edit his stuff down and you do hear the spirit box side of it. I love his show, but even he edits it down because you can't sit there and listen to static for 45 minutes. You're going to go crazy.
Well, exactly.
Yourself.
Well,
maybe you can't, but
no, I can't do it. No, I'm not interested.
See, this is where it's like, I'm just...
No, I'm good.
Yeah, but this is what I mean. This is what I mean when I say you should do it on your own, so you can see this in effect. And one of those other criticisms of that, on that same note of actually going out there and doing it, one of the other criticisms I could appreciate, which is almost blatant, like I can understand how most people would have this, is after my events on Brown Mountain, when I went to the house. And
I was very critical of that.
Of course. No,
that's me now.
Rightfully, rightfully so. One of the things people need to understand, especially listening to your episode, is you say, well, what did he expect? This is how people are in small towns, just so you know. I would like to have you know that's an assumption on your behalf that I myself am not from a small town. Greg Newkirk and I are literally from bumfuck nowhere towns full of hillbillies. We understand what small towns are like, but being people who have been involved in this field as long as we have, we also understand that at base level, we're not going to diminish someone's intelligence by beating around the bush. In our time of doing this, we've found that it's easier to be forthright with people. In fact, Greg and I had a whole conversation while I was in North Carolina before I ever went to that house, where, again, this is all the stuff off screen because it's a real thing. I'm like, hey, man, how do you think I should approach this? We can't, I need to know how to approach this. And even he gave me the recommendation that he's like, listen, man, in all the time I've been doing this, the best thing to do is be honest, because most of the time people want to be part of something strange, or they want to help and they want to give you weird info. Same thing they did when they first went to Hellier. Well, even though it's odd that it didn't pan out that way when they shot season 1, but if you listen to how it was when they had first gone to Hellier, when him and Dana first rolled up doing a preliminary investigation, they had troves of people coming to that gas station telling them their strange stories, because at base value, the paranormal is something that's interesting to people, and it is something that people want to be a part of, or at least, speculate on or help with. And when I went to that house, it's not like I went there guns blazing going, hey, did you see goblins? That's also assumption because you're not hearing what I'm saying. You weren't there, so you can't just assume that's the way I approached it. I approached it very calmly. And there is actually unreleased audio from this. I didn't obviously have a camera on me. That would be rude. I'm already a stranger showing up to this door, but I did have an audio recorder on me. So I do have that recorded, that whole interaction. A woman answered the door, and my approach to it was like, I just straight up told her in the sense, like, listen, the reason I'm here is because more so along the lines, like I had a friend named Greg Newkirk, and he received some coordinate points from someone in an email, back in 2012. These coordinate points seem to be near this house, but they're in the woods past. It's not your home, but it's past. So I'm just curious about, if there's anything in regards to people going in those woods or any kind of strange stories, and I told her about the names Terry and everything. And the reason why I had to be forthright is you also need to understand this. When you project this through our current state of mind, take the paranoia of this specific day out of the equation of the bizarre coincidence of these emails coming through. Leading up to that point, if you look at the data that we had been given, which is projected through the secret site for the UFOnauts and the preliminary investigation, we were still heavily looking at and trying to figure out the cipher, using the cipher, the UFOnauts, as a base work for a lot of the details concerning Terry Rist, who is the person that allegedly gave Greg these coordinates. In this book, one of the main things in Terry Rist's interview is that by using the cipher, he was able to find the entity that goes by the name Indrid Cold, and how he showed up in this town and he walked up to the door and Indrid Cold answered. The fact that there was a house near these coordinates to begin with that were in relation to Terry Rist, that's more so the vibe and the feeling that is going through my mind and our minds collectively, where we discussed, it's like, man, like, what's going to be at that house? Like, was Terry live there? Is it going to be something like Indrid? Like, we didn't know, so you have to keep that in mind as well. Like, it's unavoidable. It doesn't matter how strange it's going to be. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. It had to be done. And also what you need to understand, as someone who knows how small towns operate, there's a reason why going to the house was the last thing on the list.
Okay.
It's not like I rolled up in North Carolina and that was the first thing I was going to do and then get kicked out. There's a reason why I did literally everything first before going to the house. We understand there's risks. And that's the thing when it comes to people having faith in the crew, is that we're not dumb people. So if there's anything that comes off as naivety, it's probably because there's a missing puzzle piece that's not being portrayed, or it's not having a word blurb in the documentary. There was a lot that went into that trip, and there was a lot that was discussed going into that trip. That was one of them. It all comes down to the thing. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So that was the last thing. And on that note of going to that house and trying to get that information, that had to be forthright, because we don't know if they would have known who Terry was, or if there would have been something strange that wouldn't have come out if you were just being honest. There's no way to beat around the bush without coming off as strange anyway, especially given the scenario and where this particular place was located. There's no reason anyone would go up there anyway to knock on this door. So it was unavoidable, and it was absolutely the best way to approach it, was just being honest and be like, listen, I'm fine. I just wanted to ask because it's just something that we needed to know. It's part of this investigation. And on that, something else, so to bleed into the other criticism that I find so funny when this gets criticized, is the carving on the tree.
That's JC again.
Now, I understand that carvings of old men with beards are a common thing. I've been to outdoor festivals where you have woodworkers, and oftentimes when I'm at those, I will see, a bearded or like a wizard looking carving. Do you want to know how many carvings in a fucking tree I've seen?
Probably hundreds.
Since I've been to that house, 0.
Oh, wow.
Do you know how many people I know that have a carving in their tree outside of their house before I went to the house? 0. We can say it's a common thing because it's a sculpture, but you also can't discredit a concept that's already prevalent in Hellier, which is the concept of synchronicity and timing.
That's fair.
The day before I go to that place, we literally have emails of a woman telling us about faces in the trees. You can't take that in context and then twist and be like, well, that's not relevant. You're already discrediting the intellectual property of what synchronicity is. You can't look at that carving given that scenario in that specific place, as well as being a fucking fairly striking carving. It's the size of a whole tree. Subjectively speaking, that is in fact a green man. In some way, shape, or form, that is a green man. And it was very relevant at the time those emails came through. And I think that's the whole point of it, is that it made it relevant. Whether this woman was saying lies or not is less of the point, rather than it is the phenomena showing us a very clear sign that led us down a very clear path and trajectory of giving us pertinent information. That did not stop with seeing that carving. That was something very relevant, and I will die on that hill saying it was relevant. And it's absurd to have that in my mind. It's absurd to criticize the value of literally seeing a fucking giant green man at the one house that there shouldn't be a green man at, let alone one that striking. And for side detail, I did ask him about it in the perfect way. Apart from being a paranormal investigator, I am also a special makeup and effects artist.
Yes.
So I myself am someone who sculpts. I carve things. That is amazing in a lot of ways, because even if I'm talking to a witness, even like someone like Tanya, it gives me a good reason to be like, well, as an artist, someone who looks at faces, like I'm curious about, tell me details about this person. How did this person look? What were their facial features like? What did this remind you of? So I used the same thing when I was at that house. When you're talking about like being kind of coy and, or whatever, like you can be honest, but then also kind of be, turn the switch on when it needs to. The green man carving was one of those things, because you have to understand also, at my perspective, is like, we're just getting emails about people literally being cannibalized and how there's cults and all this crazy shit. So I'm like, okay, this is bonkers. And I'm like, are these people part of this? So being kind of scared.
And that was my thing, Tyler. I was actually scared for you.
Yeah, that was another thing that we both agreed on.
How do you think I felt? So like, the way I brought it up is after I was talking to this woman, I'm literally staring at this thing the whole time. And an odd detail about this carving as well is that it's not carved on the side of the tree that would like say face their driveway where people would see it like coming to their home. It's literally carved just facing their doorway. So like they see it when they like leave their door. So, and which isn't far from like this little porch area I was standing on talking to this woman. So like I'm staring at it the whole time I'm having this conversation. And the way I brought it up, I go, just casual, where I'm like, oh, I also love that carving on your tree. I go, I'm actually an artist. I actually do a lot of sculpture work and carving. Did you do that yourself? Like, did you guys make that? And she goes, no, we actually hired somebody to carve that for us. We hired a local person to carve that for us. I go, oh, that's interesting. I go, is it a green man?
Right.
And then she goes, then that's what she's like looking at me. She's like, no, it's not a green man. It's just an old man. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's pretty cool. As I'm like, fuck.
Well, at least she didn't invite you in for dinner, because you would have been dinner.
Yeah, totally. Well, her husband ended up coming up from a trail that actually went down probably close to the woods where I was. I got to talking to him as well. Funny enough, he was actually someone I had met the day before that I ran into, which was weird, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, I don't doubt, as calm and casual as I was and forthright, like I don't doubt that's probably what led to the cops coming up to me. It was bizarre because like, I don't know, my assumption is that the chief of police there is probably friends with those people, because when he showed up, he was not dressed as a cop. He was literally wearing a sweater vest. I always say he looked like Alex Jones, which is kind of funny. I don't know what else you have on Brown Mountain, but there is a lot to unwind with that trip. And it was actually crazier than people got to see, because there was more than just that happening. I actually also witnessed the Brown Mountain lights.
Yes.
And they literally manifested in the parking lot of where I was sleeping at night. And I also got trapped on Brown Mountain as well, which is another thing people don't know about. And it took me 5 hours of calling 911 to get off of Brown Mountain.
It wanted you to stay.
Oh, wow.
It was bizarre. It was probably one of the most wild adventures I've ever had in my life.
So Tyler, next time you do this, hit me up. I'll go with you. You won't be alone, because that's my big worry. I don't need to be on camera. I don't want the fame. I just want to make sure you're okay.
I did think I wasn't coming back. My mindset at the time, like what I expected. I thought those coordinates are going to lead to like a cave entrance, or they were going to lead to like some fucking weird secret hatch in the ground. Like, I didn't know. Like, apart from something physical like that, I kind of expected to. I'm like, well, maybe there's like a weird window area. I'm just gonna pop into like another reality. Like, I didn't know what was gonna happen, but like I don't know. I was
Tyler's gone, guys.
The thing that people need to understand with the paranoia and fear of that whole trip is like, and the truly bizarre synchronicity of it, which again, it's hard to feel the impact when you're a viewer of this through a documentary. But what people don't understand is you need to grasp that there had been literally 5 years that had passed of silence that had nothing to do with this case. Even when Hellier was shot, it was still following old leads. Hellier hadn't even been released yet. And out of nowhere, after 5 years from the original interactions with David that were in 2011 or 2012, an email comes in this pertinent, this pointed, the night while I'm literally folding clothing in a laundromat for the journey the next day. You have to understand the stress and the concept of it being 5 years and it being a dead case. And of all the times that should be revived, what are the chances that it comes through on that day with information pertaining to everything I was about to do, mentioning the word slough, which is something that's literally written on the card with the coordinate points, talking about faces in the trees. There's no reason that should have came through on that date. It was very strange, and like, I understand it's hard to feel the impact of that as a viewer, but people need to just step outside of themselves for a little bit and try and realize that, like, the stress of the case at that point and where it was. Then bam, this happens literally when I'm going to what's much like a video game, the last save point on our list of things to do that haven't been done yet. That's very strange, and it made all those other details very, very relevant, more relevant than they were. There's even details in those emails that aren't even public yet that were little nods to myself. There's something she mentions about Michigan in those details, and something that happened to me as a kid, which is something I don't talk about publicly yet, but it's something that's very relevant to the stuff we are digging into in the present. But one of my most impactful paranormal experiences when I was a kid has a very specific name. And Amy mentions this very specific thing in those emails, and she mentions about how it came from Michigan, which is where I'm from. So there was a lot of stuff in those emails that people don't even know about in between the lines, given the time frame it came in, where I'm like, okay, well, I'm obviously going to die on this trip. So like, but I went anyway because I want to know. My thirst for knowing what's going on, my thirst for seeing the other is more than my fear response.
And if I might state, we did the review back in, I think, January, and that was before I had, like, now I have friends that are in the entertainment business, and I understand that there's a lot that goes behind the scenes. Like, so there's a lot that I would probably review differently.
Sure.
And you're hitting on a lot of that, and I'm like, I wish I could redo that review today.
No, but listen, I understand that, but this is why you guys are like this really rare case where like I never reach out, and it's because you guys weren't. It's not that you were necessarily negative. I didn't view it like that. Like, it was just critical, but I appreciated it because like I understood your mindset, and it's valid. It's absolutely valid. It was frustrating from my end knowing that these things had an answer. And given the fact that you guys were at least willing to enjoy it and you weren't necessarily negative, I felt just for your own thirst for knowledge, or to quench those kind of questions, like you were at least deserving in some way to hear this side so that you could get those details, because they do exist. So you have to imagine my point of view, like listening to your episode and being like, these motherfuckers, like they don't know, like they don't understand. But
how dare they be ignorant? How dare they?
No, I have nothing against. I don't let critics bug me. I mean, Hellier has horrible critics, but for every critic, there's 10 people that are like, this changed the way I view phenomena. Like I don't mind. I normally don't even go out of my way to even talk to critics, but I just didn't view you guys in that way, because I understood that you guys appreciated it enough where you enjoyed it and you were curious about the topics, but you had these criticisms which were valid, but it's only because all the little nuances that answer those, just aren't displayed.
They're on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, of course. And there's a lot of that stuff.
So let me just tell you what made me think and worry about the whole North Carolina thing was having lived there for 20 years, and obviously not up at Brown Mountain, but I've been there. That situation when you were walking up there reminded me of my dearly departed mother-in-law, who probably would have answered the door, but I know the shotgun's right behind it. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
She lived out, like my father-in-law still, and like he's still alive, so he lives out there. Like they're like in Caswell County, like in the middle of nowhere, and their closest person is like 5 miles up the road. So I was just like, oh my God, what are you doing? No, don't.
Totally. No, I mean, no, absolutely. And it's not like I wasn't thinking about that.
Oh, I know.
I'm like, I know. I mean, that's why I called Greg, right before, where it's like, all right, I'm going to go there right now. I literally told him, like, if you don't hear back from me in like at least like a half an hour,
I'm in a shallow grave.
I go give it an hour tops. I'm like, hour tops. I'm like, you better start contacting people, because I'm probably dead.
I had mentioned when I saw the man on the tree, I'm heathen. So the first thing that I saw was Odin, just because I'm like, oh, that looks just like. Now, I did not believe that wasn't a synchronicity. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, holy crap, like that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's just, it was like a different interpretation based on my belief system.
Of course.
So I was like, that's so freaking cool. Like, holy crap. That's
right.
Like, what are the odds of that happening? And then, like in my own research with you guys with the three-toed, the figure, that's the rune of Algiz, which I mentioned in that episode in our review.
Yeah.
So all of it was just like, oh my God, this is so cool, because there's so many other things getting pulled in to this.
Yeah, totally. I think that's part of it. I think that's part of the reason the Hellier is showing people how all of this connects. And there is something to these concepts of old gods that I think are prevalent. And I think the more we dig into this, the more you start to see it all kind of meshes together. So these little nuances aren't so, like, the specificality at times isn't so important. But like, with the rune, I know you even mentioned, it's like, I don't know if they talked about like the relevance of the rune or that, but that is something that like we in private conversations talk about all the time, is that symbol. And what's stranger about that symbol is like heathenry outside of it, without any connection to it. The reason it pops up seemingly here, which is strange, is that it actually pops up a lot in ancient Native American locations, and these mounds, like the rebirth of Pan touches a base on that, where it's like these symbols are in conjunction to these ancient locations in the US. You find these in Ohio, you find them in Nebraska. You also, when you look at the three-toed track, there's also these strange allusions to the fact that there are a lot of bizarre cryptids that for some reason leave these three-toed footprints. And you even find this in Bigfoot lore. There are plenty of Bigfoot tracks found where they, for some reason, have three-toed footprints. They almost look like giant goblin prints. And you'll have your flesh and blood hypothesis. Bigfoot people go, well, it's because of inbreeding or it's a genetic mutation, but it doesn't add up because of the amount of three-toed footprints you find. And in fact, that's not even in line with how genetic mutations would develop, or the kinds of mutations you would see develop. There does seem to be some kind of symbolic element to the three-toed track. You see this as a recurring motif over and over and over again in a lot of these tales. Funny enough, even though there's a lot of like conspiracy theorist, not so much of a substantial story behind this, but interesting nonetheless in its subterranean connections. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the New Mexico Dulce base mythos with Phil Schneider, where he was allegedly this geologist that worked for the U.S. government, U.S. military. And it was his job to help create these secret underground bases in Dulce, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And while underground, these miners, these guys working underground, making these tunnels, ran into these creatures that they said were extraterrestrials. They killed a bunch of these guys. Phil Schneider himself was missing fingers that he claimed was because he got hit by some kind of weird blast. It's all very bizarre. I'm not saying I believe in that, but something that is funny about that allusion to an underground alien cave base in Dulce is leading up to Hellier, filming Hellier, when we're all in contact with one another talking about like our research. Coast to Coast actually posted an article about somebody finding a 3-toed footprint near Dulce, and like all this stuff. So it was just really fun. I'm like, well, there it is. There's the goblins. So it's like I've come across that myself in research. That's also in connection to missing dogs, which is what happened to David. And it's so strange because I've found things like this on public forums that have nothing to do with the paranormal, and they're not even people who are looking through that lens. We're talking like suburban moms that are. I found a forum where a woman was like, "Oh, my 2 dogs went missing, and I don't know if I have a wild animal issue." She goes, "But the strangest thing is when my dogs went missing, I all I could find were these weird 3-toed tracks that look like people's feet. I don't know what kind of animal leaves these." And there were photographs, and they were literally goblin footprints. I'm like, holy shit.
Like, we know what it is.
Yeah. But that's another thing, though, that ties into this different angle of the Algiz or the Elhaz rune. In Rebirth of Pan, Jim Brendan makes this note of how there seems to be something in association with the constellation of Sirius, the dog star, and this combat with these concepts of these things from Orion, like Orion's belt. Orion being these negative entities that always display themselves symbolically with the number 3. You know, Orion's belt having the prominent 3. And the dog star, already you have this weird symbolism where it's like, is there something to that with people's dogs going missing? You know, that's a motif that's popped up in a few cases. Even in Point Pleasant, there's a story of in conjunction to the Mothman, where someone's German Shepherd was taken, allegedly, by the creature. So there's something strange that keeps popping up with missing dogs in particular, and this phenomena. You know, I don't know what that is. You know, we can only speculate, you know, if it's a thing at all, if not coincidence. But yeah, anyway, to get back on track without rambling, like that rune is something that we talk about a lot, because whenever we see that, we're like, holy shit, look at this thing, like, whoa, looks familiar, huh? You know, and we'll see it pop up, and it's like, holy shit, there's a symbol. So it's just another one of those things that we use as a marker, a symbolic marker to show us the path, so to speak. So it's not something that we've overlooked. Like, we get messages all the time from people. They're like, have you guys ever looked into this? Or let me tell you about this. Like, you guys got to read about this. And most of those messages are things we've already done.
Yeah.
And again, just because we don't have every little thing, unless we want to make a documentary that's literally a month long with like 500 episodes, like people aren't going to get to see all that. But like almost every little nuanced thing, because we're diligent researchers, we've looked into thus far. But that said, we are always learning and we are always growing. There are new avenues that I think we need to learn more on, and there are things that we still need to do. There's a lot more that has to be done. I feel like we've not even scratched the surface of what we're supposed to be doing. That's my opinion. That's something that I think we have to continue working toward. You know, that's going to take some time, though. So without giving spoilers, if there is any curiosity about a season 3, like, because this isn't something fake or scripted, like when it comes to seasons, like we're technically already in season 3. Like these documentaries are just segments of our life. But I think we've hit a point in the case where without rushing things, a season 3 will likely need to have a lot more time behind it, because we need the time. We need the time to dig into information. We can't just jump into it like we did with 2 seasons that literally came out within a year of each other. Like, that's not possible anymore. Like, it's becoming a little too complex to just be like, well, we want to film, so let's just do it. Like, we're not a TV show, so we can't just go, well, this is the beats we're gonna hit, so let's hurry up and meet up at this time. Like, I think we're gonna need a significant amount of time before you see any more filming, or at least start to see that compiled into something as cohesive as a documentary. But that's not to say that's not always at work. You know, we're always digging in and getting new synchronicities and details that are relevant.
I have 2 things for you right now.
Yeah, for sure.
For one, I'm highly disappointed that there's not 500 episodes of Hellier. What the hell, guys? Come on, man. What's wrong with you people?
Yeah.
You have nothing better to do? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so...
Yeah, no. I mean, listen, I've been kind of stagnant. You've
only made an entire army of goblins, first of all.
Yeah, for sure. But, like, listen, to be honest, on this podcast, I've not dug in the research as I should. We're kind of in a bit of a stagnant patch. But there's things that I have to dig into more. And there's, without giving spoilers, there are real strange details that I know Greg has dug up. But he's holding on to them at the moment because he's just trying to compile them properly to let us know what they are. And once he gives us these details, I know there's going to be a lot of branches to pursue. So it's a weird point of knowing there's some pretty crazy relevant new information, but not having it at the moment, and giving Greg respectfully the time to disseminate that the way he wants to. That's as much as I'll say for now.
I just like to think that Greg has a goblin in his basement that he just keeps asking questions.
He just tases them.
What do you guys eat? Give me the answers, goblin.
Oh, man. I love it.
And that's how season 3 is going to open up.
The goblin in the cage.
It's like spread eagle tied to a wall. Greg's tasing them in the side.
If that happens, I know it won't happen, but is it going to happen, Tyler? Is it?
I don't know. I mean, you might just get some more tin cans and balloons. Listen, I do have to say, this is the most hysterical thing to me about skeptics and people who are too critical. You literally have a super skilled filmmaker. You have a witch, you have a musician, you have a crack team of investigators with a wealth of knowledge, as well as a special makeup and effects artist that can literally make fucking anything. And the closest you've got to a goblin in both season 1 and 2 is a fucking tin can and a goddamn balloon. Like, you'd have to be the worst script writers in the fucking history of filmmaking if you think that is the climax of what is possible with the team of people we have working. I could literally make a full-size animatronic goblin if we really wanted to. The fact that we don't even have a footprint discovered should be telling enough about our diligence in staying true to what we find and being honest with our finds.
That's very fair.
Like, you guys get to see what we have. Like, trust me, I would have loved to have had something a little more than a goddamn balloon. But alas, here we are.
That needs to be a t-shirt.
Right?
All I got was this goddamn balloon.
It's true. I actually do still have the balloon. I've kept it. I still have that balloon.
Oh, I have a story for you then.
Side blurb on that balloon that you might find interesting that I don't think is public info. I did look all around the balloon, as well as like feeling the inside to be like, oh, is there something in here? Like, there isn't, but I will say the barcode on it, near the manufacturing time on it, does actually fit the time frame of Terry Rist's emails. The balloon, I believe, was created in 2010. The emails came in at 2012, so it was at least before those emails, or during those emails. So it wasn't like after the fact. So the balloon, the physical balloon itself, is actually fits within the time frame of those emails.
That is incredibly interesting. That's
It is.
Yeah, that helps me believe the balloon shit a lot more than I didn't.
But listen, but
JC didn't even believe me. I had 2 balloon events after I watched Hellier, and one of them just recently, which was really fucked up because it was in the parking lot when I was at work, and that was only a few weeks ago. And I had that balloon in my car. The first one, I have it in my purse. Like, I have not gotten rid of it. It's the weirdest shit. Like, it doesn't even belong there. Like,
I love it.
okay, maybe in the parking lot at work. Okay, fine. I kind of like, well, it's in the middle of town. It could be whatever, but it's weird that it landed directly on my car.
That is really funny. That is really strange.
Yeah.
I like that one.
The other one was in my backyard, all the way back in the woods.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I do see a lot of balloon posts, and I don't put a lot of stock in most of them because it's like, listen, guys, balloons did exist before Hellier, and they will exist after Hellier. But that's not to say that some of them are strange. It's just like that does. Like, I do think it's funny how after you watch it, you had one land on your car. Like, that's a little more interesting to me. Like, I do think that's curious enough to know.
The one that was out back of my house was weirder because it's a very odd looking balloon, and that, like, it was feminine-ish, and nobody around here had a party because I know they didn't. Yeah, I could hear them.
Yeah.
There's like 3 people that live in that 20
right.
miles.
Yeah, I'm out in the middle of the fuck. I'm in Puckwedgie territory.
Oh, interesting.
And closest neighbor, she has 2 little boys, so I know that it's not them. It wasn't them. And I took video of me going out into the woods because all I could see was like a flicker of like something metallic, and I'm like, what is that? And I'll be honest with you, I did not expect to see a balloon. I actually was worried that somebody was hunting back here because we have deer and we're like on an acre and a half, and cops have been out here a couple of times just because people are, they're poaching. This is all protected land. They can't be up here. Obviously, they're right near my house. They shouldn't be shooting anyway. So I was all pissed off. I was like, I'm going out there. Me being the troublemaker, like, I'm gonna go out there. I gotta blah. She's like, if they have a shotgun, I'm like, whatever, just call the cops, right? So after I got done criticizing you, yes, I apologize. And then I get pretty close to it, and I'm like, you gotta fucking be kidding me. What is this? Then I started recording because I was like, oh no, this is not a fucking balloon. And it was.
I do love how we've done a better job at making people scared of balloons than Stephen King's It.
Yes.
but I will say this. So another thing that didn't make it in the documentary, I actually had 2 balloon occurrences. And the second one, given my role in all this, was actually, in a way, well, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's more relevant, but it was pretty impactful given what happened. What that is. So, interestingly enough, all of us on this podcast at the moment are currently living in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
So,
yeah, sure.
I am currently in Western Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes from Pittsburgh. I live in a rural location, nowhere near the city, nowhere near a populated area. And when you dig into the paranormal reports in these areas of Pennsylvania, it's very concentrated. I'm in one of the hot zones for PA. In fact, this area of Pennsylvania, maybe Pennsylvania as a whole, is even, I believe, listed in the top 3 areas to have a Bigfoot encounter.
Yep.
And you will find that all manner of strangeness is in this particular location. And I've dug into a lot of different reports, whether those be some of the missing 411 reports, anomalous sightings of UFOs, Bigfoot. A lot of them revolve around mines and caves. Big shocker there. Quarry areas pop up a lot. And being someone who, which, by the way, this is never explicitly stated in Hellier, if you want to know how diligent we are. To benefit the case, I literally took a job at a cave, and I've worked there for 2 years leading up to the filming of Hellier 2, because that's how I got caving experience.
I heard that in another interview. Oh, that's impressive.
Yeah, so it's been rewarding. I've met a lot of interesting characters through it. During one of these escapades, I went into an abandoned mine with a friend of mine. And this mine was shocking. It is something... It was something illegal, and we got caught doing it. We got over $1,000 of fines for entering this place. But that's a whole other story of how we got caught. But I will say this. There were very strange things that happened inside of this mine, and it was massive. We're talking 200-foot ceilings, massive pillars and columns. It looked like the abode of giants, and it went for miles. It was one of the most shocking places I've ever been inside of. It was literally like stepping into a hidden kingdom. It was, to this day, I've not been in a place that was as impressive as this location. It felt like I was on the moon. It looked like you were walking literally on another planet. And strange things happened to us inside of that place. We, the two guys I was with, they would smell stuff that smelled like burning flesh. They would hear these cries far off down the corridors that sound like women screaming. They were seeing balls of light. We all collectively heard what sounded like a giant man-sized serpent hiss at us from 5 feet away behind us. And when we turned around, there's nothing there. We got turned around in an odd way where after that occurred, I asked out loud, show me a doorway. And within a matter of minutes, after walking for 45 minutes in a straight shot, relatively speaking, deeper into this mine, in the matter of minutes, 2 or 3, we rounded a corner and the entrance where we came from was there. Like we had teleported like all the way back and we had no idea how we got turned around. Real weird stuff. But the reason I bring this up in conjunction to the balloon experience is after being inside of that mine, I went back there one other time in the midst of like getting in trouble. I hiked this it's a remote area. You have to walk already for like an hour just to get to this place. It's not near any civilization. It's in the forest. And oddly enough, I went there with one of my friends. And when you walk up into the location where the opening is, which is just a little tiny, non-visible hole up in a cliff face, we reach the area where you can see the cliff. And above the cliff, where you can't climb to, vertical drop-off cliff, there is a dead tree that is broken down, hanging over directly above the entrance. And there's something at the tip of that dead tree glinting in the sun.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, there's no way that's what I fucking think it is. And we climb up the cliff, and sure shit, right above the entrance to this mine, on the top of the cliff, hanging off of a dead branch, is a blue balloon hanging from the very edge. So to me, so given the negative experience of like having to pay fines, which I don't agree with, but that's a different story. And I don't care about it. I think given what happened with it, it was, to me, the way I took that was a sign of, no, you're doing the right thing by going in the mines and caves. Like you're on the right path.
Right.
Like that's how that resonated with me. So yeah, so like strange things like that happen. I mean, I think some of the most shocking synchronicities that have ever occurred to me occurred off camera. One of them being what led up to the filming of season 2. We were like a week out from meeting up for filming. And I remember talking to Greg on the phone. I was inside my local Walmart. And I was talking to Greg on the phone. I was telling him how I was low on cash. I was low on funds at that point. I'm like, listen, there's still things I need for like my caving helmet. There's some stuff I want to get for filming that I think we should have and need. I go, but I'm so strapped for cash. I go, I'm literally in Walmart right now. I'm going to buy like 2 weeks worth of ramen noodles to last me up until filming, because we were like 1 to 2 weeks out from filming. And as I am literally telling him how I don't have money because I'm going to put my money towards the things we need for this initiatory process, I am walking in the back of the store near the children's section, which is also just an interesting note. The kids section, nonetheless, buy toys. And as I'm walking past the toy aisle, I look down the aisle, and about halfway in the aisle in the center, there's a little piece of paper placed perfectly in the center of this aisle. No one's around in the store. And I walk down the aisle and I just start screaming. And I'm like, I think I just did magic, or something did magic. He goes, what do you mean? There's literally $100 bill on the ground.
Oh, wow.
It's like, that is a synchronicity. Like, that is what I'm talking about when I'm saying, like, the things we're doing and the things that are happening are literal magic.
Yes.
This, like I understand that there are, there are some syncs that are a little more nuanced, and, they can invite criticism, and that's fine. But to me, there are synchronicities that are truly impactful and truly bizarre. And that was one of them that, like, the public has never got to hear about, and that was leading up to, to the filming. So whether that was like done by something like this third order, these ascended masters, or if it's just like our own magic or the phenomena, I don't know, but like that happened, and it was like, holy shit, like, thanks. Thank you. Like, all right, I have what I need now to get what I need. So it's like, it was amazing. I mean, that is what, to me, living a magical life is. Like, there's a lot of people that don't understand how magic feels or how it looks in reality. It's not like Harry Potter where you're waving a wand and you levitate a feather in the air. It's these occurrences. It's these kinds of things that happen that I think are magic.
So we are dropping episodes every single week in October for spooky season. And I just realized that in the last episode that we just dropped, which was on some haunted cemeteries in the area, we had not talked about the fact that you had listened to our review. I just let it out there in the world. I was like, whatever, it's fine, it's cool. We're very happy that you enjoyed it, or whatever. It's cool. It's great that you even listened to it, right? At the end of that, I finally this is why our year anniversary is this month. So I was like, hey guys, just if you're out there, you can see the review that he left us a message, and it's really, really cool. And I said, maybe someday in the future, Tyler will come on the show. I recorded that weeks before you got in touch with me. Weeks before.
Interesting.
And when I was editing it, and I was like, I completely forgot that I said that, and you and I already had set the date for today.
And
so I love magic.
I mean, I know you do. I know you do.
It's like, manifest it. If you put it out there in the world, you're gonna get it. As long as you believe it.
I think that's why Hellier has had the impact that it has, or why I, at least, and everyone else involved is because I like to think that this phenomena, it doesn't necessarily see with eyes. I don't think that's necessary. When we talk about magic, a lot of it comes down to intent and our projections of self and symbolism. And I think that, like, I know that when you hear someone like me talking, you have to, like, just listen to what I say on faith. Like, you can't truly know, like, the inside of my mind. But I can just say, to the best of my knowledge, trying to be truthful externally, is that I know that I truthfully have a desire to go further and to learn more, to see more, and to experience this stuff. And I think the reason I'm involved with this is because there's something out there that sees that within me. That's what I like to think. Because I think there's a lot of unhealthy egos in the pursuit of paranormal, the paranormal phenomena. There's a lot of people in it for the wrong reasons. And, like, I honestly wouldn't even be fazed if nothing was filmed. Mm-hmm. As long as I get to continue to pursue mysteries that speak to me and pull at me in a strange way, that is what keeps me going. That's the reason I do it. I can't explain why I am the way I am. I've had quite a few strange occurrences that are very relevant to what's going on now, and it's shaping my own unique faith or belief system and my perception of reality. And I think that is part of the function of this phenomenon. At least that's the effect it's having on me. And that is more than enough reason to continue to pursue it. There is a value in it, and it has re-enchanted my worldview. And I think that is also a function of the phenomena. I often tell my friends, almost like a joke, but it's serious, to give you an idea of how impactful this pursuit has been with re-enchantment, is I can go for a drive in my car and I can pass a steep hillside or go through a rocky area. And whereas a normal person can just go through that and be like, oh yeah, it's a little pretty or whatever, I am enthralled just by driving in my car, going through an area like that, because I'll look at a steep hill and I won't just look at it like, oh yeah, that's just dirt. Instead, my view is like, man, I wonder what's inside of that. I wonder what kind of spirit resides there, if there is one. What's hidden in this earth. Like, that's how I view everything now. I'll be in the forest and those feelings will bubble up to the surface. The enchantment of something ancient pulls within. And that's what this case has given me. That's what the phenomena has given me. And that is valuable. The mundane becomes magical because of the perception of it. And I think that is where true magic lies, and that is where I'm at in this day and age.
That hit home very hard. Good.
Well, thank
you,
sir. But listen, we're all part of it. And you want to know what's funny? The truth is, and this is why I love talking to people about it, you look at me, a lot of people are like, man, Strand's fearless. And it's not true. It's not true. I have a lot of fear all the time. The difference is bravery is not without fear. It's more so having fear, but not letting it stop you.
Right.
And going forward. And I think that's valuable. I'm not a fearless person. I have fear for so many things, but I have bravery. It's about having the strength to confront those fears. And it's the same reason we can make a fun podcast like this and talk to each other, because how many people would listen to a harsh criticism? Not harsh, but a criticism and be fearful of a confrontation. We even made a joke. It's like, I got my boxing gloves. Like most people wouldn't be doing this. The fact that I reached out and was like, listen, hey, I'm willing to talk. Let's chat. Like, that's also magic. That may seem mundane, but it's like, it's not a common thing. Like the fact that we've been able to resolve things or hash out some ideas and then even produce information that the public can now listen to and like think on. We created something new. We brought something new into reality. And it's because we were willing to talk to one another. Whereas maybe someone with a thinner skin would have been like, screw these guys. I'm not going to talk to them. They don't like the Estes method. So it's like, like I have enough respect for people and the way they think to notice when something is a little more genuine or it's a good assessment, and there's a curiosity, like that's part of it. We're all cogs in a much larger machine, and if we can make good by throwing out some brain stew on a podcast, then all the better for him.
Hey, I defended you guys on the Estes method because I think it's very interesting. And I was so pissed at that article about that guy. I was ready to find that guy on his porch and be like, fuck this guy. God. I mean, I was so mad. Dude.
Listen, we actually have an inside joke about that article.
Oh, you know what I'm talking about.
We talk about it all the time.
Okay.
I know exactly.
Thank you.
He said there's a sentence in it. It's so goddamn funny. He talks about how the hair on someone's face or like their beard.
Yes.
There's hairy ceiling areas. It sounds so gross. Like we joke all the time, like amongst ourselves. We're like, hey, Connor, you better have those ceiling areas less hairy. You're gonna be hearing us. Like, so it's like we joke about that article all the time. But it's true. That article is a prime example of the
of someone who's someone who thinks they understand what scientific method is and they don't even get it.
Yeah, of course. I would just say they're anti-magical
oh, there you go.
people,
Yeah,
but they but for sure. And that's the thing too. What people don't realize about us is that we this is gonna sound silly coming from me or any of us, but we really are fairly skeptical people on a lot of things. I think that's something that's rare in the paranormal. Is like one of the other things people don't get to see a lot off camera is how often we make fun of ourselves because we're looking for shit like goblins. Like we laugh all the time. It's like we have something wrong with us. Like we have a mental illness because we're looking for goblins. Like we think we're smart, we're not. Like we're real dumb people. Like we're ruining our lives looking for shit that doesn't exist. But like we'll joke a lot like that all the time, but that's not to say we don't actually believe in it. Like we obviously do find value, but we always have checks and balances. So even though we can stretch our ability to have an open mind to concepts and see the patterns in this phenomenon, be like, man, there was something happening and like I think this is going on. There is a lot of speculation. We are still grounded, though, I think, in a healthy way, where like we are self-aware of how ridiculous we sound at times, but like we also know that it's like also kind of a real thing. So like we have fun with it. But humor in this field is so important, and that's something that you don't see a lot. And I know Hellier, given its style, tends to be a bit serious just because of the subject matter, but we really are off screen fairly humorous people, and that's part of the work. I think that's part of the work of staying grounded, is being able to laugh at ourselves and be like, holy shit, we're literally talking about how we're gonna go travel hours out of our way because we think we're gonna go in a cave and see goblins. Like, this is so dumb.
If you asked JC and I, would you like to go in a cave and look for goblins, we'd be like,
well, let me get my plate mail and +1 sword.
That's hilarious. I love it.
I would definitely be like, when are we leaving and where are my boots? That's all I need to know. I actually wanted to introduce you as today we have Tyler Strand on, the one person who I would go into a cave with.
I would go into a cave with just about anyone.
Greg will say he wouldn't trust me, but at the same time, he'll also go in the caves with me. Greg has the same kind of weird drive I do. You want to know what's interesting? So, I also don't want people to think I'm some kind of cave expert either. Like I'm still growing in that field. I've been working at a cavern for a few years, and I've been learning more ins and outs. But there's plenty of people who are far more experienced than I am. But on an interesting note, when we talk about initiatory experiences or our first step in, interesting thing to note, the first time I was ever inside of a cave was in episode 5 when you see Greg and I go into that cave. That was the very first cave. That's the very first cave I ever stepped foot in. But what people don't get, when you look at the time frame of stuff, is a whole year or a year and a half, 2 years passed between then and when we're finally in the last episode. So I have, from that point, literally a week or so after I stepped foot in that cave is when I traveled an hour from where I live to get a job in one of the largest caves in the northeastern US. So I think that's an interesting thing to know if you were to rewatch it. I think within the last year or so, I've become a lot more grounded than I was when you perceive me and see me in season 2 of Hellier. But I think that's also part of it, and people will eventually see that, is that how we all continue to change and become drastically different people through our experiences and our personal adventures.
It's just like how we were saying, watching it feels like a million years ago, watching season 1 and 2. And now there's a lot of things that have changed that I would say differently about it too. So,
But that's a good thing, and we're always changing. And that's the thing too, as much as we'll be like, oh, it's this, or I think it's this, we're always open to changing our perceptions and learning more. And it's funny because I even went back and recently I watched the tail end, the last 20 minutes of the last episode of season 2. And I was like, oh man, we really didn't know what the hell we were talking about when we were talking about this ritual. I always tell people I don't have the answers. I'm trying the best I can, but I think there's value in that that mindset of just forever being a student. That's how I always feel. I think I have great teachers around me. I learn from a lot of people. Reality is there's a lot of research I still need to dig into. There's a lot more books I need to read. I'm still very fresh and I'm still very young in the pursuit. And I don't shy away from being honest about that. But I do think I've been shown enough and I've been given enough to be handed the tools to understand that and to progress forward. I have enough tools to be able to go on a podcast like this and be able to talk about my thoughts on things, because I think they're coming from a good place. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. At least to me. I don't know about Kiki. She's pretty old, so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that brain's rotted now. You can't think.
I know that JC has some, I would say they're kind of funny questions to ask you.
Oh, yeah, no.
So I go more on the humorous side of things. I have a few Hellier related questions. First off, what do you think is the best piece of evidence, or most fascinating piece of evidence, at least, in favor of the cave goblin-esque creatures that Hellier seems to be exploring?
Oh, God, that is such a tough one. So the thing that's weird about the goblins, and it's so funny, we always go back to that as some kind of crutch. That's everyone wants to see a goblin. We want to see this goblin. But it's strange how we all collectively understand that it's bigger than that. However, there's still like a very prevalent aspect that continues to pop up time and time again, whether that be the folklore concerning the Fae, whether that be the weird three-toed tracks that were sent to Greg. So it's like, if you were to ask me what evidence we have for them, we technically, in a way, don't have any. Minus the fact that there are, the original photographs and the emails from David. So I guess my argument, if I were to actually answer this truthfully, if you were to ask me what evidence we do have, the evidence we have, I think, would be the recurring motifs in the additional research that's been conducted since Hellier, and connecting those motifs with the extraterrestrial phenomena or the UFO phenomena, and seeing how there's so many little patterns and illusions in other stories that connect with that original mindset that, wow, there's goblins coming out of caves, or there's creatures coming out of caves. Like, for clarity, like, we're the ones that call them goblins, just because like that's something you don't hear often. And it was just weird enough to make it interesting. But it's the perfect archetype when we discuss archetypal forms, because folklorically speaking, or even on a fantasy level speaking, like, goblins are always the things known to be the diminutive creatures that live inside of caves.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like the perfect allusion to what these creatures were, on top of pulling a nod to the original Hopkinsville goblin case, which is what they were actually oddly called in that incident, even though that had nothing to do with caves. So I would argue that the evidence for it is less about what we found, but rather than what exists. And I think that's an argument for most paranormal phenomena. I would say the evidence exists in the patterns it exhibits and how it never changes. One of them that for some reason I find particularly interesting, and it ties into my artwork. There are so many stories that talk about people entering these realms where these things exist, and they'll mention how the environment has a glow about it with no discernible source. They can see as if there's light, but the light has no discernible source. This is actually in the interview from Terry Riss. When Terry talks about entering this cave with these militiamen, he talks about how he's like, yeah, I thought we were just in an artificial mind deal until we started to hear the hum. And he starts talking about how the environment, or once they're in the cave, had a glow about the walls with no discernible source, like a faint glow. This motif continues to pop up even in different Fae folklore or even other stories. I bring up the tale of Edadorpa. A lot of allusions to the modern UFO phenomena and Fae folklore in that story. And even in that story, when the protagonist is going deep into this cave in Kentucky, he talks about how while he's following his guide, which is this weird faceless creature, he ends up reaching a point where he starts to see a faint glow as if he can see. And as he gets deeper in the cave, he begins to be able to see the cave walls and everything around him, even though there's no discernible source. There's even a report from the researcher Timothy Renner. He dug up a report from the 1800s of a boy that seemingly got abducted by a creature that sounds like Bigfoot when him and his father were looking for missing cattle. The kid claims in this article that was written in this newspaper that when this beast picked him up and it ran quite a distance through the forest, it led him to this really overgrown thicket, let out a roar, which is just common Bigfoot motifs in the modern age, and it opened up a doorway. This doorway sunk into the earth, and it opened up a doorway in the earth, and this creature brought the kid inside of this cave. This boy in the 1800s talks about when this creature, this beast, took him into the cave had a glow about it that had no discernible source. He could just see. When you look at the Hopkinsville goblin case, the original event that occurred in Hopkinsville, it was talked about how the goblins had a strange ethereal glow about them, that they glowed in the dark. When you look at David's photographs that are seemingly taken at nighttime from a creature peeking around a tree, that creature is oddly very bright. for the rest of its environment. And I think it's less about the fact that he took a flash rather than it is that the creature itself is exhibiting a glow, which I think is so strange. He never says they were glowing, but like when you assess the photograph, like it certainly seems like it is. And I actually incorporated that into my sculptural rendition of the goblin that I created for Hellier. I actually make them glow in the dark now, so that on a multitude of levels of both looking realistic, they literally have an ethereal glow about them, and you can make them glow in a weird way. And it actually invokes a pretty weird feeling when you do it right, when you can see it and it's like glowing. It's weird, very specific stuff like that, where cross-culturally, through different timelines, people that aren't paranormal people, that aren't experts, they'll say that out of nowhere. They'll be like, yeah, it was weird. I was walking through the woods and I walked through this weird doorway and all of a sudden I thought I was in this jungle, but like it had like a weird glow, like everything was glowing. Like you hear that. I cannot imagine that people making up stories are just making all this shit up and it fits perfectly into a narrative. That's just one thing in the many. That's one example of many. And there's so many little things like that in a lot of paranormal occurrences where you'll have a local that you can tell has absolutely no terminology or no knowledge base in this stuff. And it might take 20 minutes of talking to them before they drop one little thing because it's a side detail that they don't think is relevant. And it'll be like, oh, okay, yep, that's the same thing. Like, that happens over and over and over again. So to get back to the original question, if you're going to ask me, what is the best evidence we have for these creatures? It's literally everything that exists already. That would be my answer to that question.
Okay, I'll accept it. It's a good answer.
Like you have a choice.
No, I don't really have a choice.
I just want to say, I really want one of these goblins now. Because now they glow in the dark. I mean, seriously.
They are, not to toot my own horn, but some of them are pretty damn cool.
You say glow, and I'm just
They're
like
gorgeous.
bioluminescent.
Right.
There might be fungi that's glowing. That's what's happening in my mind.
Sure. I mean, even caves do have bioluminescent things, but I don't know. I don't know if it's bioluminescent. The reason I didn't say that term, even though I think it sounds good, is it's just because I don't know if that's what it is. It might be something stranger.
I like it. The best evidence is all of the evidence. It's a good.
That's a cop-out answer or not, but it's honest. It's an honest answer because we don't have a lot of it, but there are. The thing I find most fascinating about Hellier and about my personal pursuits of what interests me, going in the physical locations, even though I understand there's a heavy metaphysical aspect, is that there is so much of this phenomena that legitimately ties in around mining and cavern and rocky locations, but for some reason, it is overlooked. It is generally overlooked, and nobody has ever made that connection. I understand before we get some neckbeard out there going, what do you mean? This has always been a speculation about alien cave bases. Yeah, sure. But that was always a conspiratorial, offhanded thing. There's legitimate tie-ins to a lot of folklore and a lot of environments that legitimately tie into cavern locations. And for some reason, everyone is so focused on looking up at the sky and looking down at the ground that nobody considers the possibility of what's beneath them. Certain areas of high strangeness and repeated areas of high strangeness from the local view, the boots on the ground, and the areas where they occur, that pops up a lot, even in little allusions of talking about Bigfoot often occurring in quarries. It's man, it's weird. There's a lot of Bigfoot reports in Pennsylvania that occur around quarries or old logging roads or old mining roads. It's yeah, because mines are literally they're cave systems. They're allusions to limestone. And it's funny because the closest I've ever found, even though it's disconnected, I remember ghost hunters way back in the day talking, oddly enough, about the Stanley Hotel when we talk about synchronicities to Connor and Carl. There's this whole idea about ghosts. For some reason, hauntings tend to pop up around areas that have limestone. you'll hear people say that, oh, ghosts seem to pop around areas that have limestone. Fun fact, areas that have limestone are areas that have caves because caverns are made out of limestone. Your cave systems that are large and vast are created from limestone. That's what produces cave systems. So it's interesting to see some small aspect of the paranormal community like touch base on that in some way. But there's something, the limestone or areas that have it that produce caverns, it tends to hold phenomena. I was actually just listening to a podcast yesterday, and there were interviews being conducted with random people all across the U.S. about their UFO occurrences, and they'd be asked simple questions, like 3 questions, they'd be on to the next. And there was one local that was talking about his occurrence. Right at the end, he's like, I've seen a lot of them around quarries. He's like, I almost wonder if quarries have something to do with it. And I'm listening to him like, God damn it. Like, there's so much. There's so much about subliminal spaces that pop up time and time again. And it doesn't matter if they're artificial. It doesn't matter if they're mines. Here's what's funny. We focus so much on caves and talking about caves in Hellier that I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact that David mentioned how his original occurrence occurred because of a mine. Mm-hmm. At the edge of his property. It wasn't a cave. Yep. Mines are artificial. So I don't even necessarily think it matters if we make it or not. There's something about entering a subliminal space when we talk about liminality that seems to produce paranormal phenomena. And you can take that in a metaphysical mindset, but I don't know, or maybe it is I think it's both metaphysical and physical at the same time. So like I always get a lot of flack at times, and Greg and I will always go back and forth, and it's hilarious because we're both on the same page, yet we'll still banter every so often about the physicality to the metaphysicality of all this. And I truly believe that it's somehow both at the same time and not all the time. Sometimes it's purely metaphysical, ghost-like, but there's something about it that when it is physical is very important. And the caves, whether it be a ritual space or whether it be a natural environment for the other, both of those things, in my opinion, are factors of where it tends to pop up. And I don't know why that is. I'm sure there's a lot of nuances to it that I can't comprehend. But you even find this concept in where things like Dogman appear. Reports of Dogman, even though it's like, well, that's not a goblin. It doesn't matter. Like, you look at this through a lens of it being the other, and that's it. Dogman reports often pop up around cemeteries for some reason. I understand cemeteries are archetypally spooky, but you'll find that Dogman reports, especially if you dig into Linda Godfrey's research on it, they often pop up around rivers, military bases, Native American sites, like burial mounds, as well as cemeteries. A lot of that has to do with subliminal spaces, these subterranean spaces, or the concept of being buried beneath the earth. In fact, where I'm from, this is another weird synchronicity with how I'm involved in the things I've experienced. I grew up 20 minutes away from Lake Superior, the largest freshwater lake in the world. I grew up in a small, nowhere northern town of Ironwood, Michigan. It now has less than 5,000 people living in it. It's fairly isolated, but we have a beautiful lake that looks like an ocean when you go there. Interestingly enough, that lake is steeped in Fey folklore from the native Chippewa that are in that area. And the specific area I'm nearby is where this location of the lake is called Little Girl's Point. This area of the lake got its name because there's this folklore that there was this girl who would travel out to the edge of the forest and look at the lake. She was enamored with it. But she was warned not to go there because of the little men that lived in the forest and the Pukwudgies that lived in the forest there. And it talks about how she fell in love with a nature spirit, and it talks about her like hugging a tree. Sounds a lot like a Green Man archetype. And when it came time for her wedding day, the girl had vanished. She never showed up. And the tale goes that fishermen near the shore of Lake Superior, which is now Little Girl's Point, once when they were fishing, they looked up at the tree line and they seen a woman clad in green with a man, and they kind of floated off or disappeared into the forest. And it was always suspected that she was taken by the Fae, or by the little men of the forest. And what's even crazier, talking about all these illusions, and you talk about evidence and how there's a weird pattern. I already mentioned Venus. Connor saying you can enter Venus through the caves. The book Edidorpa. You want to know what the Chippewa say about Little Girl's Point and how the fairies got there?
I'm very interested.
They literally said they fell to earth. The area of the forest where the little men inhabit, where they fell to earth from the evening star.
Nice.
The evening star is Venus.
Wow.
Little strange things like that pop up time and time again. If people wanted to make stuff up, like, they can make up anything, but you can't have cross-culturally so many people make up the same thing. That's so oddly specific, especially when it's not in the public eye. Not really. You know, like, most people in my area don't even know that story, which is weird. Like, most people that grow up there don't know that story, but I brought it up because where I'm from is a mining town. I almost forgot why I brought that story up. And I'm like, oh yeah, shit, I got to mention that. Like, I'm from a mining area.
Okay.
JC's like,
I don't even remember what the original question was.
What was the best or most fascinating piece of evidence for the government?
Was that still the same question we were
Yes,
on? I didn't know.
It
I'm drinking right now.
That's
So.
fine. That's fine.
I would love to be drinking right now. I
That's
have to
great.
be at work at 2:00 or at 3:00 in the morning, so I decided not to partake this time. Oh, I know what I was going to say just real quick, because you were just talking about Dogman. The only episode so far that we've even touched on Dogman in this area is at Hawk Mountain. And while there's not a huge cave system that I know of anywhere near there, what there are is two things. The Lene Lenape story of how part of the mountain was cursed.
Yeah.
And there is the Civil Air Patrol up there. So it's training for younger kids if they want to go into the military. It's not necessarily a base, but it's got a presence there.
Well, there you go. So that's interesting. So right there is
Right?
like a little, there's a little allusion to the pattern. I don't want your listeners to think that, like, I absolutely believe caves are always necessary. Like, there's plenty of phenomena all across the board where, you know, there's probably not cave systems involved. I'm just saying that when you find them, you tend to see a very prevalent concentration, if not stories directly relating to those specific areas. And I think it's interesting enough to note. And it ties into a lot of other higher concepts, even some spiritual faiths of things that exist in the earth. Like, that's always kind of been an archetypal human concept. And if we're talking about a phenomena that may exist archetypally, by default, that those subterranean spaces have some kind of important liminality to how we perceive them, even if it be something inherently deep within our genetic code of being cavemen, literally cavemen.
Every time you talk about caves, though, I just immediately am like, allegory of the cave.
Of course, I love Plato's allegory of the cave.
Me too.
I was thinking about it the other day, and I kind of had a different take on it. Because interestingly enough, even where I work, the history shows that Native Americans once occupied the cave. But oddly enough, as large as this cave is, they only stayed in the entrance. They never went deeper inside of the cave, which is interesting because it makes you wonder, like, why? Like, what did they think was in there that made them not go deeper? But I was thinking about even just the concept of light and dark on some human level, where it's like it's a sanctuary, it's a refuge. You have people living in the entrance, and they're right in the perfect liminal placement of that location, where you descend deeper and you're in the darkness, you're in the underworld. But then you're also not in the light either. You're in the in-between space. You leave the cave, now you're outside where the sun shines. Like, there's something to that, I think, where it's the perfect liminal aspect of light and dark, like the entrance, the threshold, the crossroads, whatever you want to say, which are already, again, even just by using the term the crossroads, how many times have you heard of ritual use or spiritual meeting? Like, all of this stuff is relevant. In fact, his encounter with Injured Cold, I think John Keel pointed out that the place where Cold met Woodrow off the freeway was an area that had an overpass. And that it was an area in the modern age, when you look at these things through a modern lens, you have the intersection of old concepts with modern construction. It's the in-between, it's the crossroads of the modern age. And that is another little side symbolic illusion that is not explicitly stated in Hellier, but one of the strangest iconic things about Hellier season 1 is when you go in this town, you see these giant pillars going up into the air. It's literally a liminal aspect of an overpass being created in Hellier. They're literally, the time frame of them going there was the in-between construct of a crossroads.
Oh, wow.
And it's the same exact thing. Like, I think Keel mentioned that there was an overpass being constructed when Woodrow met Indrid. There's a lot of weird little things that like we're always talking about off camera, and that's like one of them.
I know that JC has 2 more questions for you. I'm sure he's chomping at the bit.
Sure am. Okay, so now this is away from Hellier, away from the goblins. Let's stay away from the goblins.
Yeah, totally.
So, what is one cryptid that you 100% believe is real, even if there's maybe not enough evidence to support said thing?
Oh my God, you're gonna hate my answer. You're gonna absolutely hate my answer.
Okay.
So it's funny, somebody asked me this before on a live stream I was doing. And my response to that is I kind of believe in all of them. Or it's not that I believe in all of them. What it is with everything I said about these different masks that seem to be shown to us, these different archetypal forms, I would sooner flip that question on its head and say, I need evidence to not believe in something. I've read reports, even in this area of Pennsylvania, where someone literally seen a fucking dragon. And as silly as that sounds, you want to know where else I heard about somebody seeing a dragon? Somerset, Kentucky.
Oh, even better.
And I heard it from Kyle Cadell, who runs the Paranormal Museum that's in Somerset. And the reason why I'm at a point, I'm open-minded to believing in almost any of these cryptids is because I do believe, going back to what I said earlier, that they are all cut from the same fabric. Even though I think there may be solid forms, and I could change this idea at any time, I could be totally wrong. When you look in the high strangeness in all of these reports, you start to find that all manner of strangeness pops up in the same area. That's why going to Pennsylvania, particularly the area I'm in, near the Chestnut Ridge, which has a bunch of caves, that area of the Chestnut Ridge, which is also infamous for the Kecksburg UFO crash incident, that whole area of PA has Bigfoot reports, big bird sightings like thunderbirds. It has UFOs. It has incidents of people running into things that sound like brownies or goblins or fey entities, running into the hillside like spirits. It has will-o'-the-wisp. It has all of this stuff, big cat sightings. Are we to believe that all of these things are separate living beings and somehow in some way they're not being discovered or nobody's finding a body? It sounds silly, and that's why skeptics take them. They go, well, it's obviously fake. We would have found a body. I agree to that extent, but what they're not accommodating in their worldview is the metaphysical aspect of this, and how maybe all of the stuff people are experiencing are from the same place, possibly the same thing, wearing different masks. There are a lot of documented cases where you can have 2 people side by side witnessing a strange event, and those 2 people will have seen something different. I personally know a woman and her husband who were witness to a giant UFO event. A UFO flew right in front of them over a lake while they were on the shoreline, this scenic area. The woman is the only one who's seen a giant glowing UFO. Her husband seen a giant bird. It was a giant thunderbird to him. And now when you take even that story, you're like, oh shit, that's weird. So now you're talking about an area PA that has thunderbirds, UFOs, Bigfoot. Now you're like, well, fuck, wait, now is it a UFO or is it a thunderbird? Is that a screen memory or something that's making us see a bird where maybe it's not? Or is it just something so strange that our own consciousness and our own preconceptions are partially manifesting the way that we're seeing it, because that's the only way our brains can comprehend it? I think that's always at work. So when I hear about a guy in Fayette County, which is near me, that has all this stuff I talk about, Fayette also being a power name we mentioned in Hellier. That's mentioned in
Right.
the Rebirth of Pan, which we brought up. A huge concentration of phenomena. Fayette County is where the dragon was seen. They call it the Fayette County Dragon. And I even take that a step further, and I even think about the biblical aspects of that, about like the fallen star, or Lucifer, or the dragon, you know, and how even that on even like a weirdly biblical level is like a symbolic archetypal form of the other. I came across a strange report of somebody saying it was a full moon late at night and they seen a UFO hovering in the sky, giant UFO, and all these little things were flying around it. And when they looked at what was flying around it, they said it looked like a bunch of dragons.
So have there been any cryptids that you've been proven are hoaxes or just not real?
You know, the closest I have to that I feel comfortable saying, yeah, that sounds like bullshit, is I think there's a lot of modern Mothman reports that are bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who have personally been boots on the ground that have looked into a lot of those reports, and not only do the time frames not match up, the environment doesn't match up, even aspects of the description of the moon, the full moon or the half moon, doesn't even match up with the moon cycles of the actual times given, which is funny to look at, and it's good investigative work to look at. And it's funny me bringing this up because I understand Hellier touches base on the Mothman, but it's only because it's so blatant, like an actual strange connection that was made. That aside, I think Mothman is something that's overblown, and I think that it's because most people view it as like kind of one of the scariest, strangest cryptids. Like there's a lot of people that see value in pushing that narrative of being like, oh, Mothman's popping up in my city. Look at all these Mothman reports. But when you try to track down where the reports are coming from, there's either no witnesses, and the information within those reports don't even line up with the physicality of reality of given the weather or the location of them. But a lot of them have blown up into a bigger way because people love Mothman and they want it to be real. And you know, I understand what's happening there. Like, I can't fault people who aren't as invested as people like I am in this phenomena to just dig into that or know that. You know, they just want to hear new stuff and they like hearing weird stories. I think a lot of the modern Mothman reports don't hold up. I think it's just kind of cashing in on a very popular cryptid. Like one that I think is hyperbolic that I don't necessarily put stock in is the chupacabra.
Okay, that's actually interesting.
I think the chupacabra doesn't have substance. It's not to say that I don't think there's something strange occurring with the folklore around it. I think the way that it's perceived or sketched out is very much the hyperbolic nature of what people are imagining the thing to be. So I don't think that the chupacabra has like fucking spines going down its back and stuff. I think it's all just kind of like artistic liberties taken. And you know what, to have a caveat to your question that has a good answer, one of the ones that you see in pop culture that I think is real but also fake with how it's portrayed is the Flatwoods Monster. I think there was something genuine that was cited at Flatwoods, but if you really dig back into the original reports, it doesn't actually look anything like how you see the Flatwoods Monster portrayed. It was more so like a weird metallic missile object looking thing, like a missile, no arms, didn't have like a face. It was more so like a missile, like a spacesuit with like a glass bubble. And when they looked inside through the missile into the little window area, they could see what looked like a creature inside, like a face. Which is interesting about that report. Like, it's more so like, yeah, maybe they seen something anomalous. When it became popularized and fictionalized in a way, there was an artist, I think on a talk show, that did the rendition of the Flatwoods Monster that you see today, where it's like a floating, like, metallic robot-looking lady with, like, a dress. Like, all that stuff. There's a lot of cryptids that I think are historically portrayed incorrectly because they became fictionalized and misconstrued. And I can even say that about the Mothman. You know, like, I love the concept that, like, Mothman, it's a big moth creature, but the reality is the only reason it has that name is because when people were seeing this winged humanoid, in the 1960s, Batman was super popular. And they wanted a name that sounded like Batman, so they called it Mothman. The reports have nothing to do with it looking like a moth. In fact, all of the reports that exist from the actual witnesses that had brief glimpses more so describe it like one of these giant birds, like a thunderbird. They talk about wings, like a weird body shape, how it hobbled when it ran, kind of like a giant owl. I'll probably think of some cryptids when I am done with this interview. That'll be like, oh, that's one I don't fucking believe in. Not to sound like I just believe in everything. I don't. I'm also very skeptical because I do think there is a lot of bullshit in most paranormal accounts and most cryptid sightings. But like, I think once they're solidified as a archetypal form, people run with that. So like, I would sooner believe in the reports that deviate from some of those false representations of them than the ones that adhere to them and are like, yeah, I seen Mothman. It was like a big moth. Because it's like, you asshole. It was never looking like a moth. But like, I know what you mean. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you.
No, I like it, but it's just anything that deviates too much from the original description. No, I'd 100% agree with that statement. And that way of thinking.
You asking me like what seems fake when we talk about something that should be easy to fake because it has so much power behind it and so many people want to consume it, like these Mothman reports. You know, how funny is it that you have everything you should need to make a hoax and pull it off well, and yet you still fail because there are people smart enough and smarter than you to dissect it and be like, no, the weather doesn't even make sense for what the witness was talking about. The moon phases aren't even right.
Okay.
JC's like, okay.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but I love it.
So hey, been in PA about how long ish?
I arrived in Pennsylvania in October of 2016.
Oh gosh. Okay, so you've been here for a while. You know.
Oh God, it hurts my heart to hear you say that. Yeah, I know enough of
what?
the area. I mean, like, listen, I live in a ghetto. It's not a good place.
You're near Green Man's Tunnel.
I am. That's only about 15 minutes away from me.
And Dead Man's Hollow that we just talked about in one of our last episodes.
Oh, did you really? I was actually thinking
Yes.
about going there today. I wanted to go there.
Do it.
I've been there many times. Did you know I actually had a whole live stream investigation where I made a Bigfoot gifting site at Dead Man's Hollow?
No, I did not know that.
I have been to Dead Man's Hollow many, many times, and I think it's a very interesting location. If you scroll down far enough on my Instagram, you'll find some really cool shots of Dead Man's Hollow. So that's also 15 minutes away from me. So like both of those things are like 15 minutes from me.
I was trying to pick things that I knew that we already talked about that were in your area because I didn't know if you were doing anything at all on the quote unquote spooky side for.
Oh God, I'm always doing this. You want to know one of the most fucked up things I've done that like a lot of people don't know about? I never got around to uploading the photos before my phone broke. I literally went into the sewer system of my hometown because I think there's monsters coming out of it. I was in the sewers. I was in the sewers, decked out like a true terrorist alien cave-based task force member, alone with a flare gun in my hand, thinking a flare gun would do anything, like looking for a beast that I thought came out of the underground. And it's actually really interesting. So to give some background, when I first moved here, by default, I'm curious about strangeness in my area. And I found reports that literally occurred right down the street from where I live. And here's what's interesting in a multitude of things when we talk about patterns. I even say this in Hellier too. Carl mentions that I say this in Hellier too. It's funny. You hear Carl say this, but he mentions me. When you look at the Mothman reports, the sightings with the bridge collapse, all this stuff and liminality, we have started to notice a pattern in the liminal value of bridges and borders. There's a lot of occurrences that happen along bridges and border areas of states, rivers, bridges. And there's this report from my town where a couple late at night after shopping are driving under a bridge. And when they pass under that bridge, a gigantic bipedal hair-covered monster walks across the road. They stop their car, they look at it, and they get freaked out and they keep going. I'm like, oh, weird, you know? And what's really interesting to me about that is there's only one bridge in my town where I'm near that it could have been. It's right down the street. And what makes that physical location interesting when we talk about dissecting things is that there is no way a normal physical Bigfoot just happened to be there, because here's what we're looking at on two sides of that road. On one side of the road, there is a giant sheer cliff face that's like 300 feet high in the air, straight cliff face. On the other side of the road are train tracks, which are also something that pop up in a lot of reports, and a river right after it. So you're sandwiched, and that cliff goes for a long time on this road for a while, and as does the river. So unless something like a giant weird bipedal animal walked all the way up from the one forested area way down for no reason, walking towards a town that's populated, there's no reason it should have wound up there. Here's where it gets weird.
I love when I say that too. Here's where it gets weird.
Yeah, well, my mindset up to that point, given my biases, I always tell people I try not to believe in anything solidly, but I have biases as any human does. My bias with this like spirit-like phenomena is like, okay, maybe when we talk about like the Fae or spirits living within stones, like you see in European or Norwegian folklore, I'm like, maybe it came out of like this cliff face, you know, even though there's no opening, it doesn't mean that something could pass through it. Like maybe it came out of that cliff face because at like ground level, like it's passing through the earth and then it pops out and then it runs across the road. Maybe. It gets interesting when it was in the beginning of the year. I get tipped off from a girl that used to live here, because she knew I like urban exploration. I go into abandoned buildings as well that may or may not even necessarily be haunted. And out of nowhere, this girl that was a student here messages me. She goes, hey, have you ever been in the tunnel system that exists beneath your town? And I'm like, no. I'm like, how do I get in there? You know what I mean? Like I'm already super excited. She's like, listen, she's like, follow the riverbed. She goes, go to this area, this parking lot, go to the river and follow the trees and you'll come across the doorway that leads into the underground. I'm like, okay, fuck, all right. So I park my car. I follow this dry, muddy riverbed with these dead, overgrown trees and like the beginning of spring when it still seems like fall. I walk for quite a ways, like a long time. And it leads me to one of the spookiest looking places. There's a doorway that looks just like the water tunnels in the movie It. And that tunnel, that entrance is right before the bridge that's in my town, right where this occurrence occurred. And I never knew about it until a few months ago in the beginning of the year. And I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, here we go. I'm like, well, that's what I mean. Like, what are the odds of that? That's what I mean. I'm like, holy fuck. I'm like, all right, this makes so much sense.
Oh, no, you follow that shit.
Yeah. But this is what I'm saying, though. It's little stuff like that. When you talk about evidence, or maybe not even necessarily evidence, that maybe that's not the correct term. But there's enough there where it's like the coincidence, the odds of it is like it continues to perpetuate that idea. And it's like, what are the odds you have a fucking monster walking across the road in the one place in this huge stretch of road where there's the one opening to the underground, which is a subliminal subterranean location. I think there is something interesting to that. So I literally dressed up in my caving gear. I had all this stuff, and I went into this spooky ass looking tunnel, fell into waist high water, everything. I went through the whole thing, and it's spooky as fuck down there. So like there's still more I want to explore. There's a whole other track I didn't go down that would have kept going, but I want to go back with others. But I explored quite a bit of it. Physically speaking, there are tunnels in there where it's like, damn, that would have been a real tight fit, for something big like that to go through. But my mindset is like, maybe these things are wild, and maybe it was in a like a will-o'-the-wisp form, and it's going through the earth. I think there's even an old Native American saying that says like these creatures that they reported that sound like Bigfoot can swim through the earth like a fish swims through water. I think that is something interesting when we talk about things like the goblins or these subterranean creatures. I put a lot of stock into that idea. When it comes to my hometown, with something just moving through the earth, and it popped into a tunnel, and it's like, oh, here's an opening. I'm going to leave and see what's above. And then you have random people late at night driving their car, and it's like, holy shit, there's a Bigfoot. Little narrative, that interesting connect. You know, that's like where my imaginative mind goes to. But that's like a fun, very Tyler Strand adventure that a lot of people don't know about, is me going alone into the sewers beneath my town that are full of like chemicals and like street runoff and gasoline, and like,
you're gonna be a superhero now.
I guess I'm gonna be a Ninja Turtle. I should have brought pizza down there with me. Real Ninja Turtle vibes down there, I will say that.
While you were talking about the damn dragon, I forgot about the cryptid. It's supposedly down in Maryland, but it looks like a freaking dragon. It's like the Snelly something.
Oh yeah. Oh god. I know.
Yeah.
Dana, I think, likes this cryptid. I cannot think of. Yeah, it's like the Snellywag. It has some kind of like weird. I don't know. I can't think of what its name is. I just probably made that up. But like, it's something like that. I don't know.
It's close to that.
I don't know a whole lot about it. But it sounds fun. Yeah, it does look.
It's
like
a German legend. I know that, and it does. It looks like a dragon.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. But that pops up time and time again, and like, you know, there's a lot of mythology that has dragons, and it makes me wonder where it's like, you know, maybe there's a reason for that. You know, like, it doesn't mean someone back in the past, even in like medieval times, like they're still experiencing the stuff we're experiencing now. I just think it has.
They were talking about this in the 1800s in Maryland. It's in like in the newspapers and stuff.
Yeah. Well, you want to know? Okay, if there's one thing I can add that will blend our dragons with the subterranean and how this all kind of connects in one thing before we sign off.
Do it.
There is a report from the 1800s. It's with an M. I don't think it's the Minerva monster. I think that's a Bigfoot. I might be wrong. Forgive me if I'm screwing this up, but there's a monster.
No, wait a minute. I think this is the one our friend Logan was talking about, because he wanted to come on and do just a cryptid.
Well, there's this report from one of these very rural towns that I believe occurred in the 1800s that there were tons of articles about, literally almost like an old school monster hunt, like villagers with pitchforks and everything, where this creature was sighted flying on the tops of rooftops, all this stuff. They described it a lot like a pterodactyl. It's this giant leathery winged creature, but the one weird element that kind of blends like technology and like weird UFO vibes is that they all described how it had like a beam of light that would shine out of its head like a spotlight. People chased this thing and they watched it, and it left, here you go, 3-toed tracks. Wherever it would land, it would leave 3-toed tracks. It was a lot like a giant pterodactyl, and you want to know the last place they watched it leave? Flying into an abandoned mine shaft where it never came back out.
Yeah. That's what it is. That is the thing, because the whole point was we wouldn't talk about it because it never came out.
Yeah.
So is it still there?
Well, here's and what's so funny
the
is like,
Van Meter visitor. That's what it is.
Van Meter. That's what it is.
Yep, and it is Iowa.
Yes, I just couldn't think of it. But yeah, that thing itself, it literally went into a mine. It likely came out of one and caused havoc. And it always brings me back to this quote that I found in this old book from the 1960s. Tenny actually let me borrow it. It was called The Under People. And it talked about this belief in, I believe this is like Norwegian or, more like heathen-like folklore of the Haddingland, where there are black dwarves and serpent people that live beneath the earth. And it had this interesting line at the end where it's like, every so often it was known that these visitors would enter the surface and cause chaos from time to time before they would retreat. And it always made me think of that, even in those stories like Edadorpa, when the protagonist is deep in the earth, he comes to a place where he sees these strange creatures, that live deep inside this place, and how some of them sound like pterodactyls or like flying animals. And it made me wonder, it's like, what if that's like what a lot of this stuff is, or it's like even that creature, this weird one-off incident that doesn't really fit the bill for anything. It's like, was it just some strange metaphysical thing that lost its way in its own subterranean abode that like somehow popped out into our reality? It caused chaos for a little bit and then went back to where it came. I think we're just getting glimpses of a much bigger, stranger world that we don't have the knowledge to understand just yet.
And on that note, that's a great way to end.
Well, listen, if you guys ever want to hash out like stuff that's not Hellier, any other strangeness, I'm always open to come on, have a discussion. So
Would
no worries.
absolutely love for you to come back on. We could pick a topic and just go off on it.
Yeah, sure.
Especially since you're in Pennsylvania. That's what we're all about.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast. I hope that this gave some good insight for some questions you may have had.
Well, I think I'm going to rewatch all of Hellier, and with a very different light and mindset due to this conversation. So
yes,
we do appreciate and thank you for all the knowledge you've given.
No problem. Anytime.
And remember, Kiki, that doesn't go in the podcast. They can't know.
Couldn't read last week.
Hellier sucks.
That's the worst.
Oh, man.
Our musical guest this week is Unveil out of Quebec, Canada, with their song The Fallen. You can find Unveil on Spotify and Bandcamp. When we get back, a quick follow-up to Tyler's interview along with Spooky Squad news and shoutouts.
Welcome back to Mission Spooky, you spooky sons of bitches. Kiki, are we going to start with the review of our interview with our thought?
We're going to review the review.
Yeah, we're going to review the review.
The interview.
I think the host could have done a much better job. Ugh.
It's like we're reviewing the interview. Yes.
Are we going to start with comments and on that?
I did message Tyler and I told him he had to, of course he has to listen. He's going to listen. Who wouldn't want to listen to themselves talk for this long? I told him, I said, we forgot a couple of things, or at least one thing in particular that I completely forgot to mention in the interview. And then I'm also just following up with a whole lot of information that Tyler gave you guys. Basically, it's where his information came from. And I wanted to make sure that you guys knew where that knowledge was coming from directly. And also, this is your homework. You ready to do some homework, JC?
JC doesn't know how to do homework.
You don't know how to read. I know we established that like 3 episodes ago.
Yeah, I can't read. So homework might be difficult for me. Unless it comes in a convenient audio book.
It does.
Oh, no. I also don't know how to listen.
That's apparent. Okay, so. They love us.
Do they? I mean, I do.
Oh, gosh. Okay, so in case you're not familiar with who Albert Bender is, he was born right here in Duryea, Pennsylvania. And he was a ufologist who served in the U.S. Army Air Force during World War II. The book that you need to read by Bender is his 1962 Flying Saucers and Three Men. He was also the founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau. Another book, this is interesting, the case book on the Men in Black has an excerpt on Bender that mentions that he was experimenting with Crowleyan ritual magic. Now, this is something that Tyler talked about. The quote, which I will read in a minute, comes from Alan Greenfield, who was friends with Bender's copyist, Gray Barker. This is the quote from Alan. Even Barker noted that Albert K. Bender's experiments were more like a magical conjuration than an attempt at extraterrestrial communication. Any initiated magician would recognize the elements of magical conjuration immediately. And that information comes from the Great White Brotherhood and the Black Lodge, which is a privately circulated manuscript, which was in Greenfield's possession at the time that the casebook in Men in Black was released. On the Great White Brotherhood, in case you don't know what that is, basically another name for them is the Ascended Masters. You're going to find them in Theosophy and New Age stuff. I know some of our listeners who are also Last Podcast and the Left fans will immediately recognize those terms and also recognize that the first person to talk about them in the West was Helena Blavatsky. However, Karl von Eckarthausen was the first to come up with this idea of a secret group of mystics guiding the spiritual development of the human race. So if you're up to it, go read that book, which is called The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary. And I also highly suggest last podcast's Blavatsky episodes. Those were really great and informative if you don't want to read and you just want to listen. The Kecksburg alien case was also mentioned by Tyler. There is a book for like $2.99 that you can pick up on Amazon Kindle by George Dudding. I suggest that one. Timothy Renner was also mentioned in here, and he lives in Pennsylvania right now, and he has several books out on Bigfoot. I actually just picked up the one the other day on Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, so I can't wait to read that. And then I think that's only $8.99 on Amazon as well as a downloadable book, because Mama's got hardly any room for like actual books left. It's really sad. And then lastly, he mentioned a book that John Tenney had given him called The Under People. Now that's by Eric Norman. My problem with this is that Eric Norman is a pseudonym for Brad Steiger. Steiger was on Coast to Coast. Some people might recognize that name from there, but he's a little bit untrustworthy when it comes to his sources, and he's had at least one anthropologist call him out on that. Just FYI, probably a very interesting read, but I would take that with a grain of salt because I don't know.
Quick question. I'm so sorry. Why was he studying ants? You said an anthropologist, right? Those are people that study ants.
God, kill me.
I was quiet for too long. I had to say something.
I really wish that Cord was here right now.
Me too. I always wish Cord was here. Oh, wait, is that? Oh, is that an Uber to Suplex City?
Oh, man. Yeah, Cord's getting a new microphone.
Is he? Oh, okay.
Well, he needs one because he's going to be on more regular now, so we can't have him sounding like poop anymore. As long as you're other business, please go check out Hunted Encore. Season 1 is on YouTube. Season 2 is on Fantasy Network. Go buy the music directly at Bandcamp. Now, through the rest of October 2020, you insert Spooky for 20% off when you go to check out. They're podcast pals. And some of you might recognize Charging Moose Media because that is who puts out Encounter Party, one of my absolute favorite D&D podcasts right now, along with Roll for Damage. Hey, shout out. And Plot Hooks. Okay. Then Hauntress, who we will be showcasing next month as one of our musical guests. They have a brand new single coming out on October 30th called Task at Hand. That's going to be on all streaming platforms. Just want to mention this to you. Dana Newkirk has a Magic of the Month box. She makes all this stuff herself. It's absolutely gorgeous stuff. If you follow her on Instagram, you'll be seeing that made sometimes. I do believe it's currently sold out tier on the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and Occult Patreon page. But if you're interested, just keep an eye out for an opening on that tier. And of course, if you're interested, please check out all the tiers available on their Patreon. Greg and Dana put a lot of work into everything they do, and we appreciate them. If you have not watched The Spirits of the Stanley, that is Connor Randall and Carl Pfeiffer's work at the Stanley Hotel. Please go watch that too. It is amazing. It's on YouTube. You get to watch the Estes method being created. And this was the thing that I wanted to talk to Tyler about, to let him know that even though we had our own little quirks and issues with it, we are teaming up with area paranormal investigators to start having them come on the show starting next year, January of next year. And they're going to start sharing their experiences with the Estes method out in the field. And as we get closer to January, we're going to start announcing some of those team ups. And if you follow our YouTube, which you should be doing, we have started a section of our favorite paranormal investigators, like our favorite episodes. And some of those guys are definitely going to be on the list. They've already agreed to come on the show starting next year. So really excited about that.
Super excited.
I know. It's going to be great. And basically what we're going to do there is we're either going to talk about places that they've done the Estes method, they've already been to, and I'll try to do some history matchup with that, or we're going to do the history matchup with somewhere that they want to go to, and then they're going to come on and we'll compare notes. So that should be really cool. All right, now on to our crap. If you want to join the squad, head on over to our Patreon at Mission Spooky. We have tiers at the $1, $3, and $5 level. One single buck gets you our undying gratitude, access to our booper reels, and a shout out on the cast. The $3 level now gets you early access to our new true crime side missions. and exclusive access to Kiki's Quirks, my monthly dive into a topic in magic, paranormal, or history, especially on topics and places we've already talked about. The first one was on fireflies and the paranormal and in magic, because JC talked about it for like 30 minutes.
Did I?
Ago. It was really fun.
Oh, yeah. I remember that now. Okay.
Yeah. And then our $5 level gets you access to our monthly Discord chat, which may include some special guests that we've had on previous shows. We'll never know who's going to show up. Could be nobody, could be 3 or 4 people. Who knows?
Could be Tyler Strand. We don't know.
Could be.
We don't know.
Yeah. No promises, but hey, whatever. Feel free to email us questions or comments on any of our previous episodes. That is Mission Spooky Podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Mission Spooky. Don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes or Podchaser. Remember to be kind, and you know what's really funny? I'm finding out from a lot of people now that iTunes is just whatever. Like, doesn't even matter anymore.
Oh, really? I don't know. We're still
Yeah.
good. Okay.
And then lastly, we were just on Ghost Story Guys on a very special Patreon episode for their patrons. And oh my God, that was an absolute blast.
Yes, it was.
We had so much fun.
I liked learning that Ian reads a script that Brennan writes for him. And that's why sometimes Ian says really terrible things. It's actually Brennan. And Ian's probably one of the best people I've ever met in my life. Like, just so wholesome and clean. And then Brennan just, I don't know why Brennan does this to him.
One of the other guests on there was Kevin Estes with We Need to Talk About Ghosts. I love his show. He has a special Halloween episode coming out soon where he went to one of the most haunted hotels in all of England. So possibly all of UK. I'm not sure. Not sure if I heard that right. So check out Kevin's show this week too. And then the other guest was Paul from over at Mysteries and Monsters. Also, please go check him out too. His research is amazing. And it was a real honor to sit in the quote unquote same room as all of those guys. I mean, Brennan, Ian, Kevin, Paul. It was great.
Sure was.
That is all I have, unless you have anything else to add quickly.
No. I mean, let's face some facts here, Kiki. This episode's been long enough as it is. So, you know.
It's our record long. It's the record longest episode ever for Mission Spooky.
But honestly, totally worth it. I loved having Tyler on. I don't know if I said it before, but like, he was so informative and fantastic. I appreciated that he reached out and wanted to be on our show.
Absolutely. And it's 100% true. Like, we've already talked to him and we would absolutely love to have him back on again. He has not responded back to me today, though, because there's a very important question that I forgot to ask, which was, would you actually get out of the shark cage and pet the shark? Inquiring minds want to know.
I mean, I would.
And by inquiring minds, I mean me. Mostly
and me. I also
a little bit of JC. It's so funny if it turns out it's Greg. I'm going to laugh my ass off. I just get a random email from Greg Newkirk. It's me. I'm the one that would get out of the cage and touch the shark. Oh, gosh. All right, guys. Well, stay spooky and don't die. But if you do, contact us.
Send the messenger goblin.